Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum students. Welcome to PC Science class. I hope you are all fine and enjoying the blessing of this holy month of Ramadan. Today we're going to start a new chapter from Lower Secondary Science 1, and the name of the chapter is Separating Mixtures. The subtopics of the chapter which will be discussed are filtration, evaporation, and crystallization. So the objectives of the current lesson are, by the end of the lesson, students will be able to state the names of the methods used for separating mixtures, explain how to separate insoluble solids from a solid liquid mixture by filtration, draw flowchart diagram of filtration, differentiate between solid, residue, and liquid filtrate, describe how to separate soluble solids that do not decompose on heating from a solid liquid mixture by evaporation, draw flowchart diagram of evaporation, explain how to separate soluble solids that decompose on heating from a solid liquid mixture by crystallization. Before discussing the methods to separate mixtures, we will going to discuss common terms which will be used when we are discussing these methods, and I hope you have done these terms before in previous classes. So we are going to discuss the terms mixture, suspension, solution, solute, and solvent. So what is a mixture? Mixture consists of two or more substances, but they are not joined chemically. It means that they can be easily separated by a physical method. And a mixture may consist of elements or compounds, or both elements and compounds. For example, air is a mixture of gases such as nitrogen, oxygen, and noble gases. Mineral water is a mixture of minerals such as calcium, sodium, potassium, magnesium, and water. Now, what is a solution? Solution is a mixture consisting of solute dissolved in a solvent. What is a solute? The solute is a substance that dissolves, and solvent is the dissolving medium. For example, if you have a sugar solution, then in that case, sugar is the solute and the water is the solvent. Now we have to discuss what is suspension. It is a mixture in which small solid or liquid particles are suspended in a liquid or a gas. For example, a mixture of chalk and water, it forms a suspension. Okay, now we have to discuss the methods of separating mixtures. There are 5 methods of separating mixtures: filtration, evaporation, crystallization, distillation, and chromatography. Now, these methods of separating mixtures, they basically depend upon which type of mixture is to be separated and what is to be separated from the mixture, whether the solute is to be separated or the solvent is to be separated from the solution. In the current week, we are going to discuss the first 3 methods of separating mixture, and the last 2 will be discussed in the next week. So starting with filtration. In filtration, what happens that insoluble solid particles, they are separated from the liquid in a solid liquid mixture, such as in a suspension. I'm sure all of you must have made tea, and you have added the tea in the cup. So before adding the tea in the cup, you place a strainer on the cup, and then you pour the tea in the strainer, and you observe that the tea leaves, they are unable to pass through the strainer, whereas the liquid tea, it passes through the strainer and it is collected in the tea cup, right? So the tea leaves which are unable to pass through the stainer, that they are said to be the residue, and the liquid tea which passes through the stainer, that is said to be the filtrate. So the solute or the solid which have been separated, it is said to be the residue, and the liquid or the solvent uh, from which it had been separated is said to be the filtrate. So in filtration, what happens that insoluble solid particles, they are separated from a liquid. This diagram shows how filtration is done using a filter paper. For that, you need a solution, a mixture of chalk and water, and filter paper, and a funnel. Below the funnel, a flask is placed. So the filter paper, it is folded, and then it is placed inside the in this funnel, and then the suspension of chalk and water is added. It is added into the funnel. Now what is observed that the chalk, it is unable to pass through the filter paper, whereas the water, it is able to pass through the filter paper, and it is collected in the flask. So the chalk which is left on the filter paper, that is said to be the residue, and the water which has been collected in the flask is said to be the filtrate. Now this is the flow chart of filtration. This shows filtration of chalk and water suspension. They were filtered by means of a filter paper, and chalk was left on the filter paper. It was unable to pass through the filter paper, and it is said to be the residue, and the water was able to pass through the filter paper, and it was collected in the flask as filtrate. What are the examples of filtration? We can separate tea leaves from the tea. We can separate sand or dirt from water. We can separate pebbles from water. We can separate cornflakes from milk using the process of filtration. Next, we have to discuss evaporation. In filtration, it was used to separate insoluble solid particles, but evaporation is used to separate dissolved solid particles from a liquid in a solid liquid mixture as in a solution. So in this case, how it is achieved? The solution is heated, and the liquid, that is the solvent, it evaporates. Evaporate means that it changes into vapors. And what is left behind? The dissolved solid particles, they are left behind as residue. This diagram shows how salt is separated from a salt solution. The salt solution, it is placed in this china dish or evaporating basin, and it is heated. It is placed on a tripod stand. In between the basin or the china dish there and the tripod, there is a metal gauze. So the salt solution is heated, and what happens to the solvent in this solution? It evaporates, it changes into vapors, and what is left behind is the salt, that is the dissolved solid particle. It is left behind as residue. This is the flow chart of evaporation of a salt solution. So it was separated by means of evaporation, and the solution was heated, and water, the liquid, the solvent, it evaporates as vapors, and what was left behind? The salt, which is the dissolved solid particles as filtrate. Now what is the use of evaporation? The common salt which we use in our homes for cooking, uh, that is obtained by the evaporation of seawater. So seawater is collected in ponds as shown in the photograph, and this, when seawater evaporates, the salt is left behind, and it is put into piles to dry. You can see the piles of salt in this photograph. So it is used to obtain salt, and how the salt is obtained? By the evaporation of seawater. Next is crystallization. Evaporation was the method to separate dissolved solid particles from the liquid in a solid liquid solution. Crystallization is also a method to separate soluble solid particles, but those soluble solid particles which decompose on heating. Decompose mean that on heating they split into their constituent elements. So in order to avoid that situation, crystallization is used to separate the soluble solid particle from the liquid in solid liquid solution. This method is used to obtain solid in the form of crystals. Now, what is the process of crystallization? For that, some water is taken in a beaker and then sugar is added to it and constant stirring is done, and solution is also heated. Now, it will be observed that the sugar gets dissolved in water. Keep on adding more and more sugar, and a point will come when you will going to observe that no more sugar is getting dissolved in the water, and then the solution is said to achieve its saturation point. The solution is said to be saturated solution because it has excess amount of solute. After that, heating is stopped and a sugar cube is suspended in the solution as shown in the photograph. Now what happens? What is observed that as the solution cools, sugar crystal they grow around the cube of sugar. So in this method, what is done? Water is taken in the beaker and sugar is added with constant stirring, and the solution is heated, and keep on adding more and more sugar till the solution reaches its saturation point. After that, heating is stopped and a cube of sugar is suspended in the beaker, and when the solution cools down, the sugar crystals they grow around the cube. So by this method, we are able to get pure sugar crystal, and sugar crystal of larger size are produced in this method. In the end, we're going to do the recap of the three processes. These are the three processes, methods used to separate mixtures: filtration, evaporation, crystallization. In all of these three, solid particles, they are separated from the liquid in a solid liquid mixture. But in filtration, insoluble solid particles, they are separated. In evaporation, dissolved solid particles, they are separated. And in crystallization, dissolved solid particles are separated, but those solid particles, those soluble solid particles are separated, which decompose on heating. And filtration is used to separate chalk from a chalk water suspension. It is used to separate tea leaves from a tea. Salt is produced, it is obtained by the evaporation of seawater. And pure crystals of larger size are obtained by the process of crystallization. Hope the lecture is clear to you. Kindly watch the video links mentioned in the resource that will going to help in the better understanding of the topic.